Hi, I'm Merrill Williams, and this is the beginning of the ongoing oral history. And I'd like to take a moment to go back in time to when I think things began. Most of the most of the timelines I've seen, and most of the things that have involved other people in terms of writing about the tobacco litigation, particularly with framework in line of the master settlement agreement, the people who were involved with the master settlement agreement, the peripheral uh, visionaries, so to speak, or the past visionaries, the people who were involved in tobacco in some way or other, such as John Banzoff or the organization called ASH. People who have written timelines have have come to a point um, where there's certain things that actually contribute and that they have a minor beginning and or a minor so I say a minor piece of what is actually the larger whole. So I'd like to start with what I think is the beginning and give you some indication of where I would like to frame my oral history in terms of how it affected me, how I know of it. I think I have a genuine interest in this starting at a certain point, and there are other people who had interest before that, and there were other pieces of litigation going on, and there was litigation that went on. But for all practical purposes, my focus in this particular piece is to go into an evolutionary process as much as I can, and maybe the next one and the next one too, because there is a history, and as I mentioned in some of the pieces that I've done, the academic thought is to put it into waves, 1, 2, and 3, and so anything that comes in this area tonight, as I write, as I talk to you, is perhaps on the edge of the second wave and the third wave. And it's not that I disagree with all these waves, so to speak, but I think they're not exactly tuned to what happened. Certainly not with Fox de Moisey and Alan Morrison and the litigation group and the people who were involved very early. And also, I might add, some of the people who came in approximately a year after I did, or years after, on up to a period where we have a negotiation for the what's called the master settlement agreement. So the question would be here um, to do with the evolutionary process, and so maybe you can put it a little bit better for me in a format so I can carry it through.
Yes. What happened first in the evolution of the tobacco litigation? Where were you between 1988 and 1993? Describe your work.
I can't carry it as far as 93. I'm going to start with 88. In 1988, in the context of tobacco alone, I began to work with the I was hired in November of 1987, and I had some absolutely no experience whatsoever in terms of working with the with the uh, with any kind of tobacco or any kind of litigation or any kind of substantial interesting part having to do with the law. Other than I had some experience with dealing academically in the law, and as I say, my entire field was so far beyond this or away from this that it was shocking to me that I even got a job, but I did get a job. So the beginning for me, and I think for certainly for the master settlement agreement, or what will lead to the master settlement agreement, was in 1987 when I was hired, but and when I took my place in January, and some of the timelines that I mentioned, some of those that have been put up, mentioned that there's conflicts as well as the way that my own name is spelled for some reason or other. But the actual date where I walked into the Brown and Williamson Tower uh, for purposes of becoming an employee of Brown and Williamson's Wyatt Chariton Combs, a law firm, a silk stocking law firm.
Where was
That
this?
this was in Louisville and Louisville, Kentucky, and working together with two other outside law firms that I knew were involved, the Vincent and Elkins in Texas, and the group that was to be more or less the leader in terms of how things went in coordination with, I'm sure, Carty Bacon, although I don't know that for a fact. The Everything that was brought about came from the bowels, so to speak, of the Carty Bacon projects, which had taken place before Brown and Williamson. So this was January 6th, 1988. Now, a year later, almost to the date, if I'm correct, I'm pretty close on this because I did my own research and I didn't rely on a lot of other people. A man by the name of Jeffrey Wygant came into the same shop in a different capacity. He worked on the fourth floor, and he also worked at I.W. Hughes. And let me back up here. There were two places where this project began. One, the first part began in January and had been going on in bits and pieces on a lesser level with a whole bunch of banker boxes and lawyers and different types of professions, biologists, marketing people, people who came from Texas and from Kansas City, uh, from Atlanta. Uh, and as you know, the corporate world is frequently compartmentalized, and so that's how it started. And so for me, and certainly for the next step or the next person who was to be involved in this whole matter of the new litigation or the what they call the third wave came about in a year later, and I think that's pretty close to correct. Although I can recall sitting in at my desk in another part of the project, which was at the I.W. Hughes building. I.W. Hughes was a pioneer in bringing together the U.S. lawyers with the litigation that became very serious in the mid 60s, and so they named a building after him, and he sort of navigated everything that was to happen. between the lawyers in Great Britain and the lawyers and lawyers and scientists in Great Britain with the mother company BAT and what was to happen at Brown and Williamson and other companies as well. Um, so my first date was a cold day in January in Louisville, Kentucky. I had a $100 Toyota that I parked in the back of this very mysterious. Well, actually, the first part was a couple of weeks a few weeks in the downtown, the large, very large building, the Brown and Williamson building, the Brown and Williamson Tower. Then we moved in I think it was around February to the I.W. Hughes Center. At I.W. Hughes Center, it was principally the place where the documents were to be sorted and were to be put into the hands of special people who were split into two different groups. One group was sorting through documents and bank boxes, and in the group that I was in, there were fewer people, and they were working in coordination with the same kind of people who were on special projects for Brown and Williamson, being the home team, the home council. And in Atlanta, they did biology and biology and particularly in Brown and Williamson, it was corporate, which had a lot to do with everything, and certainly a lot to do with the lawyers and how they dealt with such things as the Council for Tobacco Research and Tobacco Institute. It was practically a year. The only beginnings that were significant, at least for leading to the Master Settlement Agreement, which comes years and years later, were in producing evidence. And evidence, as you know, is how you find a reason to come to some decision, whether it be settlement or whether it's through a lawsuit. And certainly within the case of the Master Settlement Agreement, there was a settlement, not a lawsuit, just a lot of threats here and there. But then there were lawsuits as well. But the beginning of evidence, that is the evidence being the documents, and I'm sure you would agree as a lawyer, the evidence was produced from that room in I.W. Hughes. Now, a year later, approximately a year later, a guy by the name of Jeffrey Wygant came to the same building, and it was also located, I'm told, as well in the large building at the downtown Louisville. And for purposes of timelines, he was especially set apart. And from all I know, we on the second floor were separated completely from everyone who ever came near that building. And the only contact we had, or I had, in terms of anybody, was with the people who worked inside the law firm. So that had a little special door, and it was completely separate from floor 1 and 3 and 4. My interest in this is establishing the fact that, for all practical purposes, this is where the beginning was, and this is where it began. And this is where the first evidence was produced. And that means the document.